Hello, I'm Pat Dennis, and you've tuned into Creative Elk, and you're listening to the Theatre of Thrills podcast, where today I'm talking about Evil Dead Rise, and really the Evil Dead franchise in general, which is probably one of my favorite horror... Well, it's definitely one of my favorite horror franchises. It might be my favorite. It's definitely up there. It's one of the big hitters with one of the least installments, but I'm jumping the gun here. And before I get too far into it, a fair warning: I'm not avoiding spoilers for any of the franchise, whether it be the original, the series, or the newest movie. So if you don't want spoilers for all of Evil Dead, you've been warned. Firstly, Evil Dead 1. It's one of the best independent horror movies ever made, and it's pretty much a straight-up horror movie. There's not much to say about it except that it's well made. I mean, that's not to say that at the time it didn't revolutionize a lot of things. It did, especially its camera movements. Evil Dead, the original, did a lot of those things first. The point of view shots and whatnot, going through the house, tracking... A lot of very strange stuff with cameras going through the back of the car, going through a window in the cabin. But the problem is it has suffered from people paying homage to it to the point that everyone's copied it. So as far as watching it today goes, it feels like it's doing a lot of generic things that it actually invented. So as far as its impact on the horror genre goes, it did a lot. As far as its timelessness goes, unfortunately it's so influential that it has kind of suffered from those that it influenced. But still very good and still worth a watch, definitely. Then you move straight along into Evil Dead 2, which I believe, thanks to a glowing review for Evil Dead 1 by Stephen King, Evil Dead 2 got a gigantic budget for, well, comparatively gigantic compared to Evil Dead 1, and due to some copyright issues, they sort of just half remade Evil Dead 1 and then went further with it, but turned it into a horror action comedy full of just absurd humor and amazing slapstick and so much over-the-top gore that it's one of the best movies ever made. It also gave us Ash Williams, who is probably the best horror protagonist, action protagonist, film protagonist out there, played by Bruce Campbell, who just nails the role. You can argue that Ash Williams was also in Evil Dead 1, and he definitely was, but he wasn't really much of a character in Evil Dead 1. He wasn't so much the star as just another character that was there. He didn't have that goofy, over-the-top personality. He was just a normal dude. He wasn't hamming up the role to an absurd degree, and he didn't have just the greatest catchphrases in film history. He was just a regular dude. That all came in Evil Dead 2, where he reprised his role and went insane and was just tortured, cut his own hand off because it got possessed. We get the bloody chainsaw hand, which is just so freaking cool. And just so stupid. It's dumb. He has a chainsaw for a hand. Like, it's just the dumbest shit. But it's just so fun. It has what is easily one of my favorite scenes in any horror movie ever, which is after he's decapitated his girlfriend and buried her out in the forest. She comes back as a headless ghoul and just does a dance in the moonlight while he watches horrified. And then there's also the other incredible scene where the deer head, which is mounted on the wall of the cabin, starts laughing maniacally at Ash, and everything in the room starts laughing and dancing, and he just goes insane and starts laughing too, and laughing and dancing with the rest of the inanimate objects that have become animated. So it's just him dancing with a lamp at a Dutch angle in the middle of the room while a deer head laughs, and it's just the best movie. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Evil Dead 2. It's one of the ones that every October season, it's going to be put on in the background while I'm making my Halloween costume, or working on a Halloween zine, or working on a horror comic. it's going to be on in the background, whether I'm watching it directly or just doing something and it's playing. It's a yearly play for me. Then we move on to Evil Dead 3, which was unfortunately called Army of Darkness. It's a terrible name. It was supposed to be called Medieval Dead, which is a brilliant name, but the studio interjected and just ruined the title because studios are bastards. But I'm going to pretend it's called Medieval Dead because it's just so much better. That film, some people don't like it as much because it does take the slapstick to another level where now it's more slapstick than it is horror. But I gotta say, I can't help but love the movie. It's a horror fantasy, which you don't get often. It's basically if you crossed Evil Dead with Jason and the Argonauts, right down to the stop-motion skeletons. And it's just so charming, so absurd. He's using his souped-up medieval car. He's using his apparent mastery of mechanics, which I don't know when Ash Williams got this. He's such an idiot, but apparently he can build a fully functional hand gauntlet to replace his chainsaw hand just from what he can find in the medieval ages. So he's like an idiot savant apparently by this point. And it's just such a fun film. Not of the three, I wouldn't say it's the best. Evil Dead 2 easily has that, but it's different, and I respect and enjoy that they did something different. However, unfortunately, not enough people seem to respect and enjoy that they did something different because the movie kind of bombed, and it looked for a while that would be the end of Evil Dead. Weirdly, the movie is still hard to even find now, or at least it is in Australia. The only copy I've seen is on YouTube. I never saw it in cinema. I wasn't born yet before you go and blame me for it not getting enough movie ticket sales. I didn't exist, so I couldn't have gone and seen it. So that's all on you old folks for not seeing it yourself. Weirdly further, the version on YouTube has the wrong ending, which confused me later when I got to Ash vs. Evil Dead, which continues on from the proper ending. But I've seen only the one with the alternative ending. And I can't really get the proper one. If you buy the Evil Dead box set from JB Hi-Fi, it only has Evil Dead 1 and 2 in it, which is hardly a box set. That's a double feature at best. And you can't buy it by itself from anywhere here that I've been able to find. You can get Evil Dead 1 and 2 individually, and you can get Ash vs. Evil Dead the series on DVD, and you can even get the remake, but you can't seem to get Army of Darkness, or at least not as of recording this. Maybe now it will come out since they've released the Evil Dead Rise. Like, surely now is the time to cash in if you own the rights to Army of Darkness. But either way, not enough people saw Army of Darkness, and for a while it looked like the end of Evil Dead, until we got a reboot, which I've not ever seen. I do own it on DVD. I bought it accidentally while trying to get the original when first trying to get into the franchise, and then I realized it was a remake and I didn't want to watch the remake before the original. And then by the time I had watched the 3 originals and watched all of Ash vs. Evil Dead, I guess I just had become so attached to the original franchise that I didn't want to bother with the remake, but I hear it's actually good. And as a side note, quickly Googling the movie because I was curious as to when it came out, 2013, there is now heated online debate as to whether it is actually considered a reboot or a sequel, which is sort of funny because the same debate happened about Evil Dead 2. So I guess it's just a bit of what is the Evil Dead franchise. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a similar debate about Evil Dead Rise, where every now and then a new Evil Dead comes out and no one's quite sure where it fits in the canon. But I'm going to definitely have to watch it now at some point because I'm intrigued. But that's just an aside. But regardless, we had Army of Darkness. It didn't do well, and then the franchise was dormant for a while. Then it kicked off again with the remake, which I believe also didn't do spectacularly. At the very least, it didn't spawn itself more remakes. the remake didn't lead to another Evil Dead remake, Evil Dead Remake 2, like successful remakes often do. And then that was surely the nail on the coffin. But as I alluded to, despite the remake also not doing well, then we got Ash vs. Evil Dead as a TV series. The series starts off where Army of Darkness ended, but 20 years later, ignoring the remake. And like I said earlier, this confused me a little because I hadn't seen the proper ending. I thought Ash had ended up in a post-apocalyptic future, but it turns out he did make it back to the present and is working in a hardware store. So that's where Ash vs. Evil Dead ends up, and he's been working there for the last 20 years, drunk and sloppy and schlobby, and it's just so fun because he's so out of shape and so over the hero business, but he gets called on to save the world again, and he just doesn't want to do it. He's got to squeeze into a girdle and try to be this action hero where he just wants to retire and sit on the porch and drink a beer and watch the football. But you can't do that. You've got to do hero business. So I really enjoyed that. It only ran for, I believe, 3 seasons. But I think if you're a big Supernatural fan and you've not seen Ash vs. Evil Dead, you should, because it's sort of the same horror comedy vibe where the monsters are pretty scary, but the banter between the 3 main characters is so lighthearted, and it does have its fun moments, so it's good. Much like Army of Darkness, there are also those who seem to hate Ash vs. Evil Dead, but they're wrong and stupid, so don't listen to them. My opinion is superior. Although, also much like Army of Darkness and the reboot, Ash vs. Evil Dead doesn't seem to have done very well, and it gets cancelled. Which, surely, if not the remake not spawning a remake sequel was the nail on the coffin, the TV series now failing would kill the franchise completely. But the series Evil Dead, much like the Deadites within the show, it just keeps coming back, and I don't think anyone was really expecting there to be another Evil Dead movie. When we heard that Sam Raimi was doing Multiverse of Madness, we were just excited to see him do something with horror. And Doctor Strange possesses his corpse and it looks like a Deadite. And that was fun. It wasn't a good movie, but it felt like we were seeing a little glimpse of Evil Dead. And for fans of a franchise starving, that was all we were expecting to get. But then this movie comes out, Evil Dead Rise, and instantly I had to go see it. So me and 5 friends went to the movies last night. We got carded on our way in, so I feel very young. I think almost 30-year-olds enjoy being carded because it makes it feel like we're not nearing middle age and death and the crypt. But we went in and watched the movie, and it's so goddamn good. I genuinely didn't expect to enjoy the movie as much as I did, because how can any new installment hold up so well to a franchise you love so much? But even though I'm in the afterglow of having just seen it, I think every movie is better when you've only just walked out of the cinema. But having just watched it, it's up there. It might not be as good as Evil Dead 2, but it's damn close. It's the goriest movie I've ever seen in the cinema, and I watch so many horror movies at the movies. It's not the goriest movie I've ever seen, but on the big screen it definitely is, just by literage of blood and corpses. And it's just, I think maybe they might have taken the world record for most blood in one scene, most fake blood in one scene from The Shining, because if I remember correctly, the scene in The Shining where the doors open on the elevator and the blood flows out was previously the world record for most fake blood in one shot in a movie. And this film pays homage to that, and I can't imagine you would pay homage to it without adding just one more pint of blood to get the record. By the end of the film, the protagonists, I haven't learned anyone's names because I'm bad with names, but the aunt and the one surviving daughter are just soaked in so much fake blood And the whole time I was watching it, I was just remembering an interview with Bruce Campbell about Evil Dead 1 and 2, where he's calling Sam Raimi a bastard and complaining about how sticky the blood is and how unpleasant making the film was. And he was a producer in Evil Dead Rise. So I'm just thinking he's saying to the effects people and the camera people and the director, just pour more fake blood in there. I had to suffer through this, so you've got to suffer through this. But it's a total gore fest. The movie is only 93 minutes long, which is exactly how long I say all movies should be. No movie should be longer than 90 minutes with very rare exceptions, and it feels like it's 30 minutes. Like, it went by fast. When the credits rolled, my friend turned to me and said, "Is it already over? I thought there would be more." But, some people hear that and think, well, then they should have made the movie an extra 40 minutes long. No. You should be wanting more when a film ends. Always leave the audience wanting more. It ended and I thought, God, I want another Evil Dead. When's the next one coming out? Whereas most movies are 2.5 hours long, and by the time it finishes, I think, Jesus, they could have cut 40 minutes out of that. That was just too much. There goes my day. So it's the perfect length film. It's so action-packed and so fun that it flies by in a second. I already want to see it again straight away. The monsters are great. The Deadites are as good as they always are. And we do get the occasional classic line. They save it. They use it sparingly. But towards the end, we do get Death by Dawn and Swallow Your Soul. So for old school fans of Evil Dead, you get it. Some of the kills are... Well, not even some of the kills, just some of the gruesomeness is definitely new stuff. You see it in the trailer, but the cheese grater scene, is fantastic. And the end monster, where the dead mother has her dead kids burrow inside her and form this horrific spider creature, is just so freaking twisted. Like, it's amazing. I find myself liking the new protagonist a lot, even though I can't remember her name. It's Auntie something. I've got Auntie M stuck in my head, but I think that's the auntie from The Wizard of Oz, so that can't be right. But either way, the auntie's great. She's no Ash Williams, but she wasn't trying to be, and I'm glad for that. She's her own character. I didn't like that they made her pregnant and that being a driving force for her. I think it'd be fair enough if she wants to survive without it being because she's pregnant. And by the end of it, it's presented as this, character growth thing where she was upset about her pregnancy and now she's like, I'm going to keep this child. But, you just failed to protect 2 children. 2 out of the 3 kids in your care are dead, so maybe you shouldn't be a mother. And it sort of makes me worry about the possible sequel because I don't want to have a baby crying throughout the whole movie. So I don't know, maybe it'll start with the baby getting possessed by a deadite and she has to do away with her own kid. That's some twisted stuff I haven't seen on a big screen. So if that's where it goes, I'll be happy. But if it turns into like the Clone Wars animated movie where they're just going around with the crying baby hut child wailing throughout the entire movie, that'll disappoint me. But I guess we won't know until the movie comes out. But regardless, I never thought that you could do a Evil Dead movie or franchise installment successfully without Bruce Campbell as Ash Williams being involved as an on-screen character. But this one did. Her character, and really all the characters in the movie, do a good enough job, and the setting is cool enough, and the film is just engaging enough that it doesn't matter. It works fine, and I love it. The location of it being in this giant, old, dilapidated apartment building is great, and it's a refreshing change from the hut in the woods. Not that we didn't get lots of alternative things in Ash vs. Evil Dead, but I'm glad they didn't just give us a movie in a cabin in the woods again. They sort of tease you with that in the opening scene with a fake out where there is a cabin in the woods, but it's just it's a next day thing where it's not the focus of the film. So that was fun as well that they teased it with that. But it's a great movie. If you like Evil Dead, or even if you've not seen any Evil Dead before, you don't have to have seen any installment to enjoy this. It's a good entry point to the franchise, which is what you need in I won't call it a rebooting of the franchise, but maybe a revitalizing of it. I hope we get endless more sequels. I've already seen Sam Raimi say that they're going to be doing one every 2 to 3 years rather than every 10 years, and I hope that's true. I will see every single one in the cinema if they're at this quality. And hell, at one point during this film, while they're listening to the recordings, it mentions that it's one of 3 Book of the Deads. So I guess Ash had one Necronomicon. This is another Necronomicon. So there's still a third out there. So maybe that's the one that is in the reboot I've not seen yet. But there's a lot of potential there. So go see the movie, drag friends to it. We don't want Evil Dead to fail again. Let's get another Evil Dead every 2 to 3 years. And with that, you have been listening to Creative Elk. I'm Pat Dennis, and this is the Theatre of Thrills podcast. Tune in again next week to hear me ramble on about a different film or film franchise.